Right now, we're going to find ourselves talking to Black Lives Matter. Gary McFarlane joins us. He's an activist for the organisation. Gary, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. We spoke to Nigel Farage earlier on today, so we thought it was only fair. I don't know whether you heard the interview, whether that we could talk to you as well. Nigel Farage basically disagreed with me. I said basically at the start of the show that I think most people now understand the cause of Black Lives Matter. I think most people now, certainly in this country, are aware that there is a racial problem in the country and are quite happy to help with whatever that can do. But probably most people now would rather see the end of the violent protests that we've seen in recent weeks.
I haven't spotted any violent protests. I must have missed that one. Unless you're talking about the occasion when the police cavalry charged the peaceful protesters.
Well, I don't think they charged them. I think somebody threw a bicycle at the horse, didn't they?
Well, that might be open to disagreement, but I think if you look at the footage, all of the footage, and see it in context, you'll know what happened. And also the following day, when they kettled young people, also peaceful, until 1:30 a.m. And in the previous few hours, had instigated violence against such individuals, which was part of a pattern of over-policing of the Black Lives Matter protests. And the fact that the protests everywhere else in the country, and there have been actually hundreds of protests everywhere else in the country, have been peaceful. And the fact that the London ones were entirely peaceful, apart from when the police decided to intervene, tells you the real truth of the matter, which is a movement of hundreds of thousands of peaceful people protesting and demanding racial equality in the UK.
So you would disagree with those who say that your march was somehow infiltrated by people who wanted to cause trouble?
Yeah, I don't go with this.
So that means that anybody who did cause trouble then is part of your movement.
No, because it's a diverse movement and it's open to anyone. It's not a membership organisation, and there are lots of different groups that come under the umbrella Black Lives Matter.
Okay.
So I think Mr. Farage and others maybe are influenced by the Dumbo in the White House, Mr. Trump, who thinks it's all to do with outside agitators. The fact that the Minneapolis police station was burnt to the ground.
Right.
Actually, that was done by people in the community.
So that was done by people who support Black Lives Matter.
It was done by people in the community. That's what they're calling for the defunding of the police in Minneapolis, which has been passed democratically by the council.
Are you calling for that in this country?
I am, yes.
So what would you do with the defunding of the police? Would there be no more police?
What would we do? Or what we do would transfer that money that goes to the Metropolitan Police into much better community resources.
So you would have no police force, in other words. So you would have no police.
Yeah, with police ourselves, I think would be a much better approach.
Okay. So who were those people who were chasing the police at the last Black Lives Matter march? Who were they?
Do you expect me to know them? I don't know who they were, but certainly there were people who were responding to police violence, if that's what you mean.
No, they were chasing police who were not involved in any kind of violence. This was way before any of the violence kicked off, but there was footage of two young black women. Hang on a second. There was footage of two young black women stopping a group of young men chasing the police and saying to them very openly, please don't do this. This is not helping our cause. But you, I'm assuming, would identify with what they were doing and you would support it.
No, what I'm taking issue with is that why are you talking about a couple of minor instances?
Well, you've told me there weren't any.
Out of context. Of a massive demonstration of peaceful people, and prefer to talk about that rather than talk about the realities of injustice in this country and racial inequality.
I think
I know why. Well, what we don't really want to talk about other issues.
No, Gary, what we talk about on this radio station is all manner of things, and I will not be told what I can talk about and what I can't talk about. What I'm asking you is, was there any violence on those marches? And you said there was not. Only by the police, and I've just pointed out to you that there were occasions where the police were being chased away by very threatening young men.
Yes, and you haven't seen it in context, and I'm saying that the context is the instigation of violence by the police, and the context is of the wider policing of the Metropolitan Police, which leads to tasering, which leads to killing, which leads to brutalisation on an everyday basis and yearly, monthly basis in this city.
When was the last time a black man was tasered by the police? When was the last time a black man was tasered by the police?
About 2 days ago.
2 days ago. Who was it?
You don't keep up
Who was it?
You don't keep up the news.
Well, why don't
Millard
why don't you
Scott.
tell me who it was and we can
Let me
report
tell you who
it?
it was. You've asked me a question. Let me tell you who it was. It was Millard Scott. It's a 62-year-old man who could have almost died because he was tasered by the police. Why is he tasered? Because he's got black skin. He happens to be the father of Wretched 32, who's a very well-known rap star. That's why when he put the video up, it got several million views. People are outraged by that. They're lucky that hasn't actually been a riot, to be quite frank, because this is what's going on up and down the country to people that aren't as well known. That's why people hate the police. That's why we want to defund the police.
Well, that's why some people hate the police.
Are an oppressive organisation that exists to basically keep working people in their place, and the black perception of that working people in particular in London.
In London, well, I mean, I'm very surprised that we haven't. I'm very surprised that we haven't heard about that story, to be honest. And I'm going to look into it. I'm very surprised because, generally speaking, if the police taser anybody, hang on, Gary, hang on a second. No, hang on. If the police,
Scott is a very well-known civil rights fighter, Stafford Scott, and it's his older brother. So you should know, and you should really do your intelligence and do your research.
Well, I've asked you a question. You've given me an answer. Which is fine. What else is Black Lives Matter aiming for in addition to getting rid of the police?
Well, there's some certain things that can be done before we get rid of the police, such as banning the rollout of tasers. That would be a very good start. Banning stop and search, because black youth and black people are 9.3 times more likely to be stopped by the police than anyone else, and that has no impact on actually bearing down on crime whatsoever, but is entirely oppressive. They could start by paying the money out, the 200 million that was earmarked for Windrush, and an amnesty for everyone caught up in the Windrush scandal, which is a matter of deliberate Tory policy that send people to their deaths in some cases in this country because they were told all of a sudden that they weren't British, although they were invited into this country in the 1950s and their descendants. That was an outrage, and it's still an outrage in our community. They could start with a public inquiry into the massive disproportionate black and minority ethnic persons that have died in this pandemic. That would be a good start also. Many other things they could be doing, such as looking at the institutionalized racism across all areas of employment and education. In education, they could be doing something to introduce not just black education as a monthly thing every October, but actually integrated into the curriculum, something that's been demanded for several decades and still has not happened. And that doesn't mean just talking about Mary Seacole, the black nurse, although we should talk about her. Actually, it means integrating African history into the history lessons. So those would be good starters.
Okay. Why are you suddenly asking for all this now, though?
I think we've been asking for it for a very long time.
Well, you haven't been marching. Well, you haven't been marching about it for a very long time.
It's come to a head, hasn't it, because of what's happened in the United States of America?
But does it not all seem? But surely, if you've been this, but surely, hang on, if you have been this dissatisfied with the way society is, Gary, surely you should have been demonstrating before now. You shouldn't have been waiting for an excuse because of something that happened in America. Surely you should have been doing it every week.
Well, people that say they have a good grasp of history, your recent history is not very good. So 2011, do you remember when Mark Duggan was murdered by the police?
You mean the drug dealer, Mark Duggan?
That led to uprisings. Oh, so it's okay to murder drug dealers if that is the case, if he was a drug dealer.
Well, he was shot. Anyway, he was shot by. No, hang on, he was shot by an armed police.
Anyway,
Gary, well, no, you got to let me speak, Gary. Listen, Gary, you have to let me speak, otherwise this ain't going to work. All right, and I can mute you if that's what we have to do. The point is, the riots were caused by an incident which happened when the police were tailing a known drug dealer, a known criminal who had been involved in very violent acts in the past. You might say the police should not have shot him, but the police made a decision to shoot him because of the way he was acting, right? Now, that was a riot which then ensued as a result because people wanted to vent their frustration, and many people accepted that. But there was an awful lot of violence done to many parts of this country, and particularly parts of London, which would have, I would suggest, be counterproductive to the community in which people lived. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, so we agreed he was killed by the police. We might disagree about why or how and stuff, but he was killed by the police. I think we can agree on that one. And then there was a response. And so to your earlier question, why haven't you been talking about these things before? 2011. Well,
that's 9 years ago.
A good example of action talking about these things. Why haven't we've been there's demonstrations every year about you just don't pick them up. That's not our fault. Every year about the number of deaths in police custody, or organised every year, every November, I believe, in this country, in central London. But it's just not reported by the police. By the media. The things that you do report are, when there's a riot, you're very good at reporting those, or when there's someone throws an Evian bottle in the direction of a police force, you're very good at reporting that.
Well, if somebody throws an Evian bottle at a police officer and hits them, they could actually kill them. I don't know whether you think that that's acceptable, but I would rather the streets of London were safe for me and my family to walk around.
The trouble is, they're not safe for black youth to walk around, are they? That's the problem.
Well, there's a lot of black youth who get stabbed to death, right?
Yeah, so...
And who are they being stabbed to death by?
What?
Who are they being stabbed to death by? The police?
The reason why there's knife crime is to do with the years and years of massive inequality that exists in this country that has driven black youth into a position where they have no opportunities, where they get excluded from school. They're the first ones to get excluded. They get no qualifications, can't get a decent job. Some of them drift into petty crime and worse, and into gangs. And that's only a minority, by the way. But those that do end up in turf wars over who's going to sell in what areas, and sometimes end up attacking each other, sometimes with knives.
Okay.
So
what would you? Let me ask you a question, Gary. What would you do?
If you change the social context, instead of actually taking more and more money out of working class communities, there'll be less crime.
Well, I tell you what would you do with the drug? What would you do? Hang on a second. Let me ask you another question. What would you do? Can you please would you please let me have a conversation with you, Gary? Stop trying to talk over me.
I'm trying to give you some facts.
Well, I want to ask you a question, okay? I want to ask you a question.
I'm just trying to answer them.
Well, let me ask you another question. If you, in your world where there are no police officers, what would you do about the drug gangs in this city?
Well, in the world when there's no police officers, it goes as a piece with a number of other things happening. So that money would be diverted, would be part of a whole heap of more money that would go back into our communities and actually undermine the drug dealing, because people would have decent jobs to go to.
So you actually are that naive that you think people will stop taking drugs? Really?
No, we can also. Well, what drugs are you talking about? I personally think they should all be legalized.
So you want to legalize all drugs? So that's another aim, to legalise all drugs. And so what would you do about the drug gangs?
Black Lives Matter movement. I'm saying it's my aim.
All right. So all right. Well, let me ask you. Well, let me ask you personally then. What would you do? What would you do with the drug dealers?
Well, if you legalised all drugs, the drug dealers would then, I guess, be capitalist corporations, as they are in the United States, some parts of the United States, and in Canada, where some drugs are legalised. For example, marijuana.
Okay. So you're quite happy for capitalist companies to run the drugs then?
No, I prefer to see a revolution where we get rid of capitalism and we run society in the interest of working people.
Okay. So when you say get rid of capitalism, what does that mean to you? How does that look?
It looks like a situation where, as we're seeing around the world, well, particularly the United States, some parts of it, people take to the streets and take matters into their own hands and start to run things in a democratic fashion and exert the democratic control. You think America
is not capitalist now? Is that what you think?
No, I said that we're beginning to see the beginnings of people power, where people begin to see their own power and begin to realise that actually they are the ones that produce the essential services, not the bankers and the heads of the corporations. They're the ones that produce the essential services, and actually people are beginning to gain the confidence when they see the cretins that run our societies, how incompetent they are, and begin to realise through their own actions that they are perfectly capable of running their own lives and the things that affect our lives and the products of our labour.
Do you believe in democracy, Gary?
Yeah, I believe in absolute democracy.
Okay,
yeah.
So you believe in elections?
I believe in a much higher level of democracy than the current setup.
How can you have a higher level of democracy than one man, one vote?
Well, firstly, you'd expand it to women, wouldn't you?
Well, women do vote. Women can vote. Gary, women are allowed to vote.
Man, you said man, didn't you? But anyway.
Yeah, because the phrase "one man, one vote" is a very well-known phrase. Would you like me to say "one person, one vote"? Would that make you happier?
Yeah, it would. Yeah. So
I'm sorry if I offended you, Gary.
That's all right. You haven't offended me.
That's good.
I'm just trying to educate you.
Well, you're not doing a very good job, I'm afraid, Gary.
because you keep interrupting me, but that's typical for talk
Yeah,
radio.
well, interruption is part of debate, mate. If you don't stop talking, I have to interrupt you. I interrupt Peter Hitchens as well.
You've asked me to tell you what is a higher form of democracy. You haven't let me yet.
Well, go on, tell me. Tell me, I can't wait.
Right. A much higher form of democracy is where we elect instantly recallable delegates, as they did in the Paris Commune of 1870-71, as they did in the Russian Revolution of 1917 for a few years before it degenerated. We can go into that if you like. And those delegates are instantly recallable, and they are elected to control what goes on in society in terms of our production and what we produce and who gets services and so forth. It's all democratically accountable. As opposed to getting a vote once every 5 years, you get a vote all of the time. And
yes, but you see, the trouble is, Gary. But the trouble is, Gary. If you had that voting system, Gary, would you not have got in the end the same result as you got back in December, where the Tory party, which is massively more popular than anything else in this country, would be the ruling party? Would it not?
Not in that system, I don't.
Why not?
Well, because it presupposes that we've already had a revolutionary situation in this country. And in the process of a revolutionary situation, people's ideas change. As I was pointing out earlier, people become deceived in their own power. And so the Tory party would be the last people to get any vote, I would imagine, inside a workers'
You've got
council.
you've got a great imagination, but I think you have no evidence with which to back that up. The people of this country, Gary, I'm afraid, disagree with most left-wing ideology. They don't want a revolution. They don't want some kind of people power. They want the police to protect them from the bad guys, and they don't wish to enter into some anti-capitalist, dream state where nothing works. You've just mentioned the Russian Revolution, which resulted in an absolute horror show for many people. People were murdered by the thousands by Stalin. People were murdered by the millions by other places where this so-called people power has actually happened. Why don't you call it like it is? It's nothing to do with people power. It's what you want and what the people who agree with you want. It's not about what other people want, and it ain't democracy, whichever way you cut it.
There's lots of different people in the Black Lives Matter movement with lots of different ideas. I happen to be a socialist. I'm quite open about that, but not everybody is. There'll be lots of people actually.
Hardly anybody is, Gary.
A good idea, I'm sure. So it's a broad movement of all different sorts of people. But what I would argue, and what I argue inside the movement, is the way to get results is by using revolutionary methods. The way to get results is by a mass movement, as Martin Luther King built in the United States of America. That's how we got a black president elected, because people fought for their rights, but not by petitioning, not by pleading, not by voting. They did it through a mass movement of people on the streets. And to the extent to which such movements are violent is dependent on the state trying to clamp down on them.
So you would be happy to be part of a violent movement for change?
No, I said the extent to which those movements become violent is to do with the state clamping down upon them.
So are you saying you would be happy to support violence to overthrow the system?
No, I'm happy to support a mass movement to overthrow the system.
Okay. Final question for you, right? Are there going to be any more Black Lives Matter marches in London?
Of course. I don't see racial equality happening this anytime soon unless we carry on marching. So we have to keep the momentum going. Obviously, we don't want people have decided to call off the march on Saturday because the fascists wanted to attack it, and no doubt it would be the black youth that would be blamed for fighting back in that situation. So it had been moved to Friday.
Well,
so
what makes you think the people you refer to as fascists, Gary, aren't going to be able to change their movement to Friday?
They're not very clever. They booked it all up for Saturday, but I'm sure maybe they will. But
why do you call them fascists, Gary?
Because we were talking about organisations like the Democratic Football Lads Alliance. You might have seen them on the streets of Coventry a couple of days ago, where they were celebrating. Some of them were celebrating the promotion of Coventry City to the Championship, I think.
That doesn't sound like very fascist behaviour.
Most of them chased two black youths into a corner and almost lynched them. Those kind of people.
When you say almost lynched them, that's very sort of provocative language.
Media. Well, it's not what happened. I'm just saying what happened.
Well, when you say they almost lynched them, what do you mean exactly?
They chased them into a corner, into a dead end, and there was a baying crowd of several dozens of supposed football supporters chucking beer bottles and all sorts.
Oh, chucking bottles. Oh, what? A bit like the Black Lives Matter march then.
Hang on, a couple of them had weapons. They could have got killed, but actually the police turned up and got in the way.
Oh.
But actually,
So the police that you want to do away with saved their lives.
Yeah, to an extent they did actually, yeah. And the reality was that they actually handcuffed the black kids because the white fascists said that they got knives. So they immediately handcuffed the black kids, not the white guy that was brandishing a knife, if you see the video,
right.
Which I think Facebook.
So it doesn't sound like what you were saying.
They're those kind of people, very violent, religiously racist people. And in Hoddesdon, in Hertfordshire, you might have seen them also sea-kyling and making monkey noises at a peaceful Black Lives Matter demonstration a few days ago. That is on social media. The Tory MP has actually said it was an outrageous occurrence and they're being hunted down. That is the racists and fascists by the police. Apparently, we'll see what comes of that.
Right. And do you also endorse the defacing of the cenotaph and the spray painting of Churchill's statue?
Well, Churchill, what did it say? That he's a racist. That was actually a statement of truth.
No, it's not.
Fair. So,
well, it's not. It's a statement. It's a statement of opinion, Gary. It's a statement of opinion.
Well, you don't know much about Churchill. You should read his biography. What's his name? Boris Johnson's written one, hasn't he? I haven't read it myself, but
you haven't read it.
Something about Churchill. No, but in 1943.
But it's okay to just throw. It's okay to call people racist, isn't it? You just call everybody a racist.
He said that the Aryans should rule the world. Basically, that's what Churchill was about. That's a rough quote from him.
Have you ever studied Karl Marx, Gary?
Indians were
Have you ever studied Karl Marx, Gary?
Pardon?
Have you ever read anything by Karl Marx?
Yes, I've read a lot.
Would you call him a racist?
No, I wouldn't call
Why
him
not?
a racist. No. Because he wasn't a racist.
Oh, I see. Okay. So you don't think his views on people of colour are interesting?
I do think his views on racism are very interesting.
Right.
And he was a great supporter of the abolition movement and of the Union armies in the Civil War, because he understood the need to actually destroy slavery and the racism that went with it in order to build a unified working class that could actually make a revolution.
Yes.
I understand.
Well, it's interesting that a lot of the people, but do you seriously, Gary?
In the Bengal famine in 1943.
Do you seriously think? Do you seriously think, Gary? Hang on, Gary, listen to me. Do you seriously think that writing Winston Churchill is a racist on a statue in the centre of London is going to make any difference whatsoever to the attitude of people who you would regard as racist? If anything, it's going to make them more racist.
Did I say anything about that? I said, you asked me what I thought about it. I said it's a statement of truth.
Well, I asked you if you endorsed the act of actually spray painting on the statue. And I also asked you if you endorsed the defacing of the cenotaph.
Do I endorse it?
Yes.
I don't endorse it. I didn't do it, but I understand why it happened.
Would you condemn the people that tried to set fire to the Union flag?
I didn't see anyone try to set fire to the Union flag, but again,
well, you've obviously missed it. It's on social media, Gary. You must. You might have to change the way that you look at social media.
Around the world, the Union flag represents many people around the world as a symbol of imperialism. So I can understand people that know their history might want to burn it.
Are you proud? Let me ask one final question, Gary.
Right, he is a racist.
Gary, one final question, Gary.
We don't need to take lessons from Churchill or the Tories about fighting fascism. They're the one that capitulated to fascism.
I see. So you wouldn't.
Churchill.
All right. So Churchill didn't fight fascism. Excellent. All right, Gary. One final question, Gary. One final question.
To defend the British Empire. That's why he had a beef with Hitler. He agreed with him on supremacy. He agreed with him on the Aryans to rule the world.
So he agreed with him. Right, that's why we went to war. One final question, Gary.
You went to war to defend the British Empire. That's why you're in North Africa. That's why he wanted to invade North Africa and did invade North Africa to defend Egypt. Why people don't get a history lesson?
Gary, one final question for you.
What happened in the Second World War?
One final question for you, Gary. One final question, please. One final question.
Yeah, please go for it.
This is the big one for you. This is your chance to prove that you're not actually rather deranged. Are you proud to be British?
No, I am an internationalist.
Thank you very much
nations
indeed. Gary McFarlane is not proud to be British. He is an internationalist. He would like us not to have capitalism. He would like us not to have the Tories. He would like us not to have fought the war, because actually Winston Churchill was on the side of Adolf Hitler. These are the kind of people that run Black Lives Matter. This is Talk Radio.